Hey, everybody, it's Crafting Journey. We're going to listen to the opening statements in the Thomas Randolph case live today on Friday Dance. Yep. Okay. The judge is reading them their jury instructions right now. So let me bring in that second screen so you guys can see what's going on.
Case, you will learn that on May 8th, 2008, specifically at 8:45 p.m., the defendant calls 911. What you're seeing over here on this monitor is 6517 Rancho Santa Fe. This is Sharon's home, a home that she invited the defendant to move into and live with her. When police arrive, there are 3 people inside that residence. And you will learn 2 are dead. This is the defendant's wife, Sharon Randolph. She was shot in the head in the hallway just outside of her master bedroom. And there was this man who was shot multiple times. And lastly, we get to this man. That's the defendant. That's what the defendant looked like 15 years ago. This excerpt, this still that you see, is from a walkthrough that he gives to the police 1 week after the murder, where he, in his own words, tells the police exactly what happened. What you're looking at here is a crime scene diagram. This is important just in terms of orienting some of the stuff that is in this house. Right there is where Sharon's body was found. You can see her head is kind of almost into the master bedroom. You can see there is a hallway that goes straight to that second body. That is the hallway that leads to the garage. And this is where the second man is found. This area, and in particular the northeast bedroom, the office, is important for orienting ourselves about some of the things the defendant says happened on that night. You will learn that the defendant will tell the police that he and Sharon had been in Utah for the entire week essentially before this, tending to his father. His father was ill, and the 2 of them were gone for an entire week, leaving the house empty. He will tell you that the very next day from the day Sharon is killed, on May 9th, they plan to leave the state again and return to Utah to take care of his father. You will hear on that night of May 8th, the defendant and Sharon go to dinner at the Santa Fe to a steakhouse called the Charcoal Grill. They were going to celebrate Mother's Day early because they were going to be away in Utah and Sharon wouldn't have an opportunity to be with her daughter, Colleen, or her grandkids. You're going to hear, according to the defendant, they planned after dinner to see a movie, but they decided to cut the movie short so they could come home early to have sex. He will tell you that before they got home, they went from the Santa Fe to a gas station that you're going to see is right next to the Santa Fe to fill up the tank because they were leaving the very next morning. That gas station, you'll learn, is called Funny's. He will tell the police that when they pulled up to the garage, it's essentially a 2-car garage, but it's really tight. There's a car already parked inside, and it would be really difficult for him to pull all the way in and have Sharon exit from the front passenger side. So when he pulls up, Sharon exits first, with the defendant in the driver's seat remaining in the car. He will tell you that he pulls in, waits in the car, and gets the car into its slot. The defendant will tell police that he didn't hear anything for 2 main reasons. He tells the police that he's essentially deaf, and also he had the car turned up for music really loud. So he doesn't hear anything. Sharon goes inside, and he hears nothing without incident. You will learn that he says that when he opens the door to the garage, he sees Sharon at the end of that hallway, lying face down. He tells the police, I thought I saw a shadow kind of farther down the hallway near Sharon. So he gets nervous. So he goes into that side bedroom, the one that I had pointed out on the crime scene diagram, and he reaches for a gun. It's kind of hanging in one of these like almost like shoe closets. You know, they look like rectangles, and you can slot things into. He reaches in and he grabs his gun, and as he makes his way out to that doorway of the bedroom, to that hallway to get back towards Sharon, an intruder bumps into him, comes his way right into him. And you're going to learn that that intruder was wearing a black ski mask. And he was wearing a sweatshirt, a baggy sweatshirt. The defendant tells the police at that point in time, he had no idea who the intruder was. He explains that he notices the intruder starts to struggle for a firearm out of his baggy clothing. And so what he says he does is he pushes the intruder on the opposite end of the hallway from that doorway. He pushes him across, and then he pulls out his gun and starts to shoot at the intruder multiple times in that, essentially at that doorway and in that hallway. He explains that as he's shooting at this intruder, the intruder starts to kind of make his way down towards the garage door, right? The way to get out. Even though the garage door is closed, he claims that's the way the intruder decided to run. And he follows and continues to shoot. And ultimately, he continues to shoot until the intruder falls down dead just inside the garage, right at the entryway of the garage door. And then the defendant, when it was all kind of done, he discovers that the intruder is none other than his handyman, Michael Miller. The defendant then tells the police this: I immediately call the police. The evidence will show that when the defendant recounts what happens, he is the hero of his own story. He comes in, he sees his wife killed, and then takes out the intruder. However, the evidence in this case will show that the defendant's story does not add up. You will learn there are a lot of problems with the defendant's versions of events. Problem number one, the evidence will show that the scene tells a very different story. The evidence will show he claims that he shot Miller in the hallway of his house multiple times. You will learn this not only through the walkthrough, but Mr. Randolph gives an interview the early morning hours of May 9th, because this happens on May 8th. We kind of blend over up past midnight. He's giving an interview. So right after it happens, he's essentially telling this same story that he tells 1 week later in the walkthrough. And then about a month later on June 3rd, he does another interview where he's recounting essentially very similar details about what happens. But he's very consistent that that shooting happens in the hallway. You will now see a few of these excerpts. You're going to get a chance to watch his interview on May 9th, his walkthrough that happens on the 15th, and his second interview on June 3rd. You'll get to see it all. And I hope as you do this, you'll take good notes about the things that he is saying. But here's a couple of things that you will eventually learn through the course of trial.
Did you fire again into the hallway?
Yeah, I believe so. Like I said, I fired a lot, and then he came out and turned around again.
And now, is he in the garage now?
He's right at the doorway there. I think he was trying to open the garage door. Yeah, in the garage, and heard a noise. I'd already turned around to go back to where Sharon and I heard a noise. I just assumed it was him. It was loud, and I turned around, shot it again once or twice. And he was laying there. He wasn't even going anywhere. I shot him again, but it was the fire extinguisher had fallen off the refrigerator, and I just remember hearing the noise. And then
How close were you to Mike when he fired?
I don't know that he fired.
When you fired?
Me, probably, either one of you. And just as soon as I could get enough distance he was right up in my face, like he was reaching, I thought he was trying to get my gun, but it was.
So you're indicating about 3 feet.
Yeah, if even that. It was close. I could hit him just as easy, but I don't fight. I got this fat back neck thing, and I swing at you, and I might just be standing there still swinging at you tomorrow. So,
And this was in the house still?
yeah, right around that bedroom door.
These, you will learn, are excerpts from his walkthrough, where again, he's recounting the very thing that he tells the police about what allegedly happened that night.
As we got up in here, he kind of rushed up on me a little bit, and that's when I just pushed him. Boom, boom, boom. He started going out toward the shed. I don't know how many times I shot him, but I just kept right on going. Boom, boom, boom. And he's just laying there. Now. And when I heard that noise, it really did scare me. Boom, boom. Except the door didn't come down. It stayed just like it was open. And I actually got close. Boom, boom.
You will learn when crime scene analysts process that scene, there is not a single bullet strike in the hallway. What I mean by that is there's not an impact mark. There's nothing on the wall. There's nothing on the floor. There's nothing on the ceiling. Zilch. You will learn there's not a single drop of blood in that area of the hallway. Not even a drop. Despite the fact the defendant said he shot boom, 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 over and over and over again in that hallway. And you will learn there is only one casing found in the hallway. But where it's found is right at the lip of the door that goes into the garage. Almost essentially where the defendant said he was standing when he kind of did those last couple boom booms at the end. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the very hallway that the defendant claims he shot Mr. Miller in. As you can see, and you look and the evidence will show, there's no apparent blood. There don't appear to be any casings except for that one right there. That's it. But this is where the defendant claims his shooting of Mr. Miller occurred. But when the police and CSA start to process the garage, that is where they start to find bullets. That is where they start to find a lot of casings. And the evidence will show that unlike what he said, the evidence, this physical evidence, will show that the shooting actually occurs in the garage, not in the hallway. You will learn that 4 of the 5 bullets are found inside the garage. The only other bullet was found inside Mr. Miller. You will learn that 4 of the 5 casings are found well into the garage. And the only other casing is found right at that lip of the doorway in the hallway that you've seen. This is the garage of Sharon and Tom Randolph. This is Sharon's vehicle. To the right is Tom's vehicle. The vehicle on the right is the one that he said that he drove in on that night. As you can see over here, that is the doorway. That is the doorway that the defendant kind of leans over and does the final shots, right? That's where he claims this all concludes. This area over here, all the way to the left, is where one of the casings is found. Despite the fact that the shooting happened all the way in the hallway, one of the casings is found here. The second casing is found near Mr. Randolph's car on the opposite wall. There's that same door, and that's casing number 2. will learn that the third casing they locate is the one that we've seen right at the doorway of the hallway. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the bullets. It's found in front of Mr. Randolph's SUV. This bullet is found underneath the SUV. And these two bullets, 10 and 11, are found in Mr. Miller's clothing. So when they move Mr. Miller, they kind of roll out of his clothing. You will learn, as I had said, that there's a walkthrough that's conducted about a week after Miss Randolph, Sharon, and Mr. Miller are killed. During this walkthrough, in addition to doing the walkthrough, crime scene analyst named Randall McPhail, or Randy, comes in to do some additional processing, in part to process the blood spatter in the area where Sharon was killed, because she receives a headshot, spreads up on the walls, and so he's there to process that. When he is there a week later, there are two more casings that they locate, and again, they're found in the garage, in this area over here. One of them is found in this green toolbox. And the other one was by that water heater. Oops, right over here. If I can go back. Problem number 2, the ski mask. This is what Mr. Randolph has to say about the ski mask on Mr. Miller's head.
I was actually in the room, and he came in and we bumped into each other, and he had the mask down, but like it wasn't on, he thought it was black. Because it wasn't all the way down, it was like maybe you could hear or something, like maybe it pushed it up. I might have pushed this mask up because I'm taller when they came in here, but just pushing it down, that'd be short. Pardon me? You'd be pushing it down, not up, right? Well, I'd be pushing it kind of sideways. I wasn't like knocking it off or anything with my hands. So probably hit him in the back of the head. Did you tell it was Mike yet? I knew it was Mike because of his chin. But I don't know if he had his mask on then. It seems like he still had his mask on then. He had his mask on when you
Yeah, he had his mask on there for sure.
And when you're back here and you squared off on, you still have his mask on?
Yeah.
And then when he went between him now turning and you continuing to shoot and him going to the ground, he still got his mask on. I think so. And as I remember, the mask wasn't all the way down. It was like rolled up one roll about right here. As I remember it.
And that interview there, that's the one on June 3rd. So that's interview number 2, just for context. What you're going to learn is that he only describes Miller's mask being off kind of after the shooting is done. Throughout his different interviews and in the walkthrough, he will never describe a distinctive process of, I watched Miller totally remove this mask. And so here's the issue. That's where Mr. Miller is found. The defendant says he nudges him at some point to roll him over. And this mask is found over at the kind of the passenger side of the Randolph car, Mr. Randolph's car, right? So if you're facing the garage door, it's to the left. Here's the thing with that ski mask. There's no bullet holes in it. And there's no blood in it. And that's a problem because Mr. Miller was shot multiple times in the head. There are several entry-exit wounds. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a trajectory rod, which will show you the pathway of one of the bullets that went through Mr. Miller's brain, which would be difficult to not have a hole in the mask if it's sitting on your head. You will learn throughout the course of this trial that another problem is the trajectories of the bullets that passed through Mr. Miller's body, not just through the head, don't match up with what the defendant says occurred. Problem number 4. You'll learn that the defendant repeatedly tells the police he never heard any gunshots because he's hard of hearing.
Okay, and did you hear anything?
I have the radio on, or she had the radio on. And it's pretty loud because I don't hear. Definitely hear.
Okay,
It took a few minutes because I was at the garage door to make sure it comes down.
when you were out of the truck, did you hear anything inside the house?
Didn't hear a thing.
Did you ever hear the shots before you went inside the house? Did you ever hear any shots?
I didn't hear anything, but I'm really deaf.
The evidence will show that's not what Mr. Randolph told 911.
Is he alone? Yes, well, as far as I know, I just heard shots.
I just heard shots. Those are the words of the defendant you will learn at 8:45 p.m. Mere seconds or minutes after this all unfolds. I just heard shots. His words. Problem number 5. You will learn that the defendant, based on all the evidence, waited 12 minutes after Sharon is shot to call 911 and get help. 12 minutes. How do we get to that point? Well, the evidence is going to show this. There's 4 components to this issue. The first is a gas station video. The second is a neighbor. The third is a 911 call. And the fourth is the defendant's statements to police. You will learn that the defendant says, instead of going to see the movie after dinner, they're going home to have sex. And before they do, they go to Funny's gas station.
When you leave the casino, do you go directly home?
No, we started to, and then we went to Funny's, so it's called Funny's gas station on the corner there. There's a gas station there, not just around the corner. And she said, we better get gas now because it's gonna go up tonight because of the weekend, over the weekend. So we stopped and filled up with gas, and I think that was it, and we went home.
And you're going to learn that the police take that statement and they follow up on it. And you're going to learn that they go to Funny's gas station. And sure enough, they find this footage here. At 8:22, if you look all the way over there on the right, that you will learn is Mr. Randolph's SUV pulling in. I think they get a receipt also from that to confirm that a transaction was done to kind of pump that gas. And you're going to see that at 8:26, Mr. Randolph and Sharon leave, just like he said. They filled up gas and they made their way home. (8:26 p.m.) You're going to learn that when they leave at 8:26 p.m., you're going to learn from the detectives as well as from Google Maps that really it's only a 3 to 4 minute drive home from Funny's. This is an overhead map. What you're looking over there is all the way down there, starting at that blue dot at the bottom. That's Funny's gas station. You look at that big structure on the left, that's the Santa Fe Casino. All you have to do is kind of go up Rancho, hang a quick right, make a left, make a right. I guess a right up Rancho Santa Fe. Voila, you were at Sharon and Tom's home, right? Google Maps says it's 4 minutes. You're going to hear from detectives who actually drove the route. It said they took 3 minutes. But bottom line is, if he's leaving at 8:26, the evidence will show he should have arrived home about 8:30. Well, that brings us to the neighbor, Mark Bartlett. The evidence will show that Mark Bartlett was actually in his garage at that time. What you see here is, there is the defendant's home, 6517 Rancho Santa Fe, and if you follow the little dots, that's Mark Bartlett's house. You're going to learn that this is the vantage point from Mark's house looking at the Randolph house. And it's the house with the big palm tree to its left. So it's the dark brown garage. That's the Randolph house. That's the vantage point from the Randolph house looking at Mark's house. right? That's the distance. Mark Bartlett's going to testify that, yeah, I was their neighbor. I lived at 5200 Dana Springs. He's going to tell you that at around 8:30 at night, he's in his garage. He's working on his car. Garage door is open, and he actually notices and hears the Randolph vehicle pulling in, because he actually says it catches my attention. I actually look over. I watch them pull in. I watch the garage close. He's going to tell you he's on the phone with his buddy, and he starts to hear gunshots, multiple gunshots ring out at around 8:30 at night. And then he's going to tell you that he's so kind of shocked by it, he tells his friend, like, hey, yo, there's shooting going on right over there at the neighbor's house. And then he's going to tell you that here's the thing. Even though he heard those shots around 8:30 at night, the cops don't show up until 20 minutes later. Around 8:50, that's when he remembers police showing up, 20 minutes after he hears the shots. So police, you will learn, do a little digging, some follow-up. You're going to hear that they get his phone records. And what they see is, sure enough, at 8:33, he's on the phone with his friend Alex, right at the time that he said he heard those shots. So here's the deal. What does the defendant tell the police when they ask him, hey, from start to finish, like when you pulled in and saw what happened to Sharon and the encounter with the intruder and you did the shooting, how long did that all take you to finally pick up the phone and call 911? And these are the defendant's words. Oh, got ahead of myself. Hold on a second.
So all told, how long do you think it took from the time you opened the door to you being on 911? You didn't have some report that was a lot quicker than obviously walking through it. 2-3 minutes maybe.
2 to 3 minutes for this all to unfold and get on the phone with 911. Here's the problem. The defendant, you will learn, leaves the gas station at 8:26. Based on the pathway, the evidence will show he should have arrived home at 8:30. You will learn that Bartlett hears the calls around 8:30 and his records show 8:33. However, you will learn the defendant does not call 911 until 8:45 p.m., which would mean, according to the evidence, that Sharon would have been lying in that hallway minute after minute after minute, suffering from a gunshot wound to the head. Problem number 6. You're going to learn this is a troubled marriage. This is Tom and Sharon on their wedding day. You will learn that in the summer of 2005, they meet on a dating site on the internet. You're going to learn that around January of 2006, the defendant moves from Utah to Sharon's house. You will learn that on January 16th, the defendant is signing up Sharon for a life insurance policy, $100,000. You will learn that 2 weeks after that, he signs up Sharon for another life insurance policy for another $200,000. You will learn that around March of 2006, they go to Mexico to have kind of a wedding ceremony. You're going to learn that it's not official. They're not technically legally married from the ceremony, but it's kind of a wedding nonetheless. And by March of 2007, they legally marry in Las Vegas. This, ladies and gentlemen, are copies of the insurance policy for $100,000, where Mr. Randolph is the 100% beneficiary of the policy, even though the evidence will show that Sharon has a daughter, grandkids, and this is signed on January 16th of 2006. Here's another policy for $200,000. You'll even see that there is another policy from Stonebridge that he makes a claim on after Sharon dies. There's at least 3 policies. You will learn from people that family and friends that is right after they get married, one of the things that they did was pick out his or her urns. And you're going to hear from Sharon's family and friends. And they're going to tell you from jump, they were really concerned about this relationship. They were very concerned. You're going to hear a little bit about Sharon. She had been married for a long time. Her husband passed away from cancer. And what you'll hear from people is that Sharon didn't want to ever be alone. She was kind of terrified of it. But time after time at different stages, they felt, family and friends, like this is going too fast. You shouldn't be bringing this guy in. Doing all this. It gets so bad, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear from at least one witness where they legitimately believe that the defendant might kill her, and they warned her. They warned her. And you will learn that Sharon didn't listen. And then there's the other woman, Liz Labrador. You will learn that the defendant, while married to Sharon, had a girlfriend who lived out of state. Her name was Liz.
His wife knew about Lizzie.
Everybody knew about Lizzie. Everybody knew about Lizzie.
Everybody knew about Lizzie. Why? Because he didn't make it a secret. He would tell people about his girlfriend. You will hear from family members of Sharon that heard him talking about his girlfriend while married to Sharon in front of them. You can imagine they weren't necessarily a fan of that. You're going to learn that he dated this woman before he met Sharon, while he dated Sharon, during his marriage to Sharon, after Sharon. And you're going to learn that this is a huge issue in the marriage that causes Sharon great pain. Great pain. And you're going to learn through the course of this fairly short marriage that the defendant would leave her repeatedly. I'm leaving you. Not just like I'm just taking off. Like, we're done. I'm out. I'm leaving. And I'm going to go be with Lizzie. And pack up his stuff and go in a U-Haul and literally move in and then kind of come back. And there was this real yo-yo back and forth. And you're going to hear about how much pain that caused Sharon. Where you're going to learn that she struggled with, I think maybe I should get a divorce. This isn't great.
You know, the Lord said it's really weird. I go out and find another woman, and she forgave me for that at the time that I was going to give Pauline $100 to go to England. She says, if you give her that money, I swear to God, I'll divorce you tomorrow. I mean, and there was no doubt in my mind she meant it. Her.
That is a description of the defendant talking about Sharon and how she felt about infidelity versus giving her daughter some money. Colleen, you'll learn, is Sharon's daughter. You will learn, the evidence will show from the witnesses that knew Sharon best, him being with Liz and another woman was far more painful than giving her daughter $100. But this is one of the ways the defendant frames his relationship in an interview to the police.
And that's where I met Sharon. Her husband died of cancer a year later, and mine died a year earlier. And I was on the internet with them, and it was just, man, Lizzie fight all the time, fought for 2 days and fight for 5. That just ain't fun. So.
And this is the defendant, how he kind of explains the timing of it, right? He's saying, Sharon had just lost her husband, and then I was kind of dating Lizzie at the time, but his relationship with her is kind of, fuck for 5, or what is it, fuck for 2, fight for 5, whatever it was, So even he's kind of explaining a very similar kind of timeline on this. But in this trial, ladies and gentlemen, you're not just going to hear from Sharon's friends and family. You're going to get to hear from Liz. She's going to confirm, yeah, we were dating during his marriage to Sharon. So I apologize about the typo on that. She will explain that they saw each other regularly. You're going to learn that the defendant, from her end, he was going back and forth. The same kind of yo-yo. She's going to tell you, yeah, that was what was happening. I'm going to be with you. I got to go back. You're going to learn that while he dated Liz, he also took out a $150,000 life insurance policy on her. You're going to learn that 50% was going to go to the defendant and 50 was going to go to her daughter, Tina. And you're going to learn that's how he pitched it. He's like, I'll pay for everything, but you should have some peace of mind for your daughter, the woman that he's dating. And you're going to hear from Liz's perspective. I'm like, well, it seemed like free money. So I was fine with it. You're going to learn that around February 2008, probably around Valentine's Day, you're going to learn that Liz is kind of tired of the back and forth. And you're going to hear that roughly around that time, she gives the defendant an ultimatum, which is basically, listen, you really just have to choose. Like, you either pick Sharon or pick me, but you really just have to pick one of us. And you're going to hear the defendant attorney, he'll figure things out with how to end it with Sharon. Agendas and motives. And that was something opposing counsel had mentioned during voir dire, and I thought that was kind of something interesting, so I just jotted it down. Because I felt like when you listen to the evidence in this case, it's really applicable to the defendant. Because in this case, the defendant had an agenda and a motive. Problem number 7. Defendant's strange relationship with Michael Miller. You're going to learn that in February of 2008, same month roughly that he is getting an ultimatum from Liz, the defendant just happens to meet Michael Miller. You're going to learn that the evidence will show the defendant's description of the circumstance of them meeting and connecting up is strange. Let's talk about the defendant and his handyman, and I definitely put that in air quotes. The evidence will show the defendant sees Mr. Miller at a gas station buying a 40-ounce of beer. You're going to hear that according to the defendant, his first impression of Miller is, I think that guy has a drug problem. You're then going to hear, after having that impression, the defendant decides to buy this total stranger that very beer. The defendant will tell you, though, as I'm leaving the gas station, I noticed that strange guy who I had never met before walking down the street. And you know what the defendant decides to do? You're going to hear he pulls over and he invites the stranger into his car. Are you going my way? Are literally the very words the defendant uses to the police. That's what I said. Hey, you going my way? Come on in. And you're going to learn, according to the defendant, I drove him home. We talked for a while, for an hour outside of his house. You'll learn he was from South Carolina. He moves here to Vegas because he's looking for money. He's living with his aunt and his uncle, and he's trying to get on his feet. And you're going to hear that he talks to them for outside an hour. And then at the end of this hour, he decides to call him up and offer him a job as a handyman for his house. Agendas and motives. Here is what the defendant talks about. This is him recounting in his own words this meeting.
So you've known him 4 or 5 months. How did you meet him?
At a convenience store, I was in there getting my car. It was a terrible since I was getting my car washed. Waiting. I was just sitting there just waiting, and he was in line before me getting a beer, and it's like he'd been doing, manual labor because he was all dirty and stuff. But there was 2 or 3 people in line, and he was just kind of joking and said, this lady, she's an asking for ID. She does it every time I come here. Every day I'm buying beer, she always asks me for ID. And something down there, maybe I don't have it or something. Anyway, so I said, well, don't worry, I'll just get it for you. So I just paid for the beer, and I was just going to give it to him. And he said, no, that one's yours. I'll get this, and that's the kind I want or something.
When you first met him,
Did you ever have
an inkling that he may have had some kind of drug problem?
well, yeah, obviously he's black and didn't have a job and was buying a 40-ounce or whatever they call them. But just chit-chatted there, and he took off, and then I got my car done, and I was going toward the house, and I seen him along there, and just pulled over and said, hey, need a ride? Going my way. And sure, so I was there. I just popped in and sat over in front of his house the first thing for probably an hour and just talked.
So do you engage him to come over to the house and do some work for you?
Yeah, well, I talked about doing something. Excuse me, he says, I'll help you if you need some help. I ain't got nothing else to do. And I called him and asked him if he really wanted to work. And he said, yeah, he'd come over. And he said he's not good at what he does, but he's a good worker. He works consistently. It's not like go down and get a couple of smacks on the corner. As
So how often has he come over to your house and done work?
A lot, a lot. He's also come over a lot just to watch ball games. He's ate dinner with us 2 or 3 times.
And if you catch it, you may not have caught it, but the evidence will show he says right in that statement, I called him. I called him to invite him to work. Well, you're going to learn the police gathered the defendant's phone records, his cell phone records, as well as his home record. And you're going to learn that first phone call happens on February 16th, 2008, right in the month of February. You're going to learn through the course of these interviews that one of the strange things in terms of the evidence is the defendant consistently describes Mr. Miller as a poor worker. A poor worker. And yet, you will hear him also say, almost always in the very same breath, he is constantly having him back over to do more work. And you will hear him say, I was repeatedly paying him money. I was loaning him money for someone who apparently couldn't work. And you're going to hear from other friends and family of Sharon who also kind of observed, like, it was weird. They hung out all the time, but they basically didn't do anything. It was weird. You hear about a whole roof thing, this roof project that never gets worked on. But it's the big thing they're going to do, but it never gets done.
What about Mike?
He's bummed. But he's a nice guy. I mean, I mean, I knew he was a bum.
How about Mike? What would his shortcoming be?
He didn't work, and I don't know why, because he supposedly had all these job offers. That's why we had him there, is to lift shit and lift boxes and do work. He couldn't grind a nail, he couldn't put a screw in to save his life.
Couldn't do those things to save his life. And yet, day after day, the evidence will show this gentleman over here keeps having him come over to do more work and give him more money. The evidence is going to show over the course of the 2.5 months, what is happening here is the defendant is grooming Mr. Miller for the ultimate payoff. Just kill my wife, give you a portion of the money. I mentioned that they acquired his records, and you will learn when you just look at the records, it indicates this is not a normal handyman-customer relationship. The first phone call happens on February 21st, 2018. I misspoke, I apologize. And between February 21st and May 8th, 2008, they call each other hundreds of times. You're going to learn that this guy's basically number 2 of all the people in the universe that he's calling. You're going to find out number 1's his girlfriend. But it's a strange thing for someone who's just a handyman. And you're going to hear from Miller's family too, as well as Sharon's family. And they're all going to testify about this working relationship. And I definitely put that in air quotes. It was strange and concerning to many people on either side of the fence. The Miller family didn't like it. The Randolph family thought it was strange. You will learn that they essentially never do any work, but they hang out all the time. There are times where there are people in the house and then they kind of duck off to just talk in private. You're going to hear that the Miller's family repeatedly warned him, you need to stop hanging out with that guy. There's a big age gap. They don't really kind of cross over in the same kind of communities and hang out. You're going to hear the defendant doesn't have a lot of friends or social network, and Miller's in a new town and he doesn't really know anybody. And now they're essentially inseparable. You're going to learn that the defendant took his handyman out shooting. You're going to learn that he invited his handyman out for date nights with Sharon. He even came over for the Easter dinner that occurred just about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks before Sharon is murdered. But ultimately, when you listen to all of the evidence in this case, what's going to be clear is there is a conspiracy here. The evidence will show that the defendant's motive was not just insurance money, but he potentially stood to inherit the house. You will learn that he targets and locates a person who is financially down on his luck. He brings him into the fold. For weeks and months, he sustains him with money and loan for the ultimate plan. The plan was to murder Sharon on that night. You will learn on his possession, Miller has a key to the residence, that he enters through the back door. You'll hear the defendant has a variety of different explanations as to possibly how he got that, but the evidence will show Miller had a key to the house. The evidence will show that Miller was lying in wait for Sharon, while the defendant sat outside keeping his hands clean. Sharon walks in and is killed by Mr. Miller. You're going to learn that based on their pace of travel, because they were out of town, Sharon was not in that house the week leading up to her murder and was literally leaving back to Utah. This was the only window of time. And you're going to hear that on the day of the murder, the defendant spends basically the entire day with Michael Miller, running errands, looking at jet skis, going to a bank that they didn't quite get to because it gets closed. There's all sorts of things that they do during the day hanging out. So there's just this couple-hour window of time. Dinner date with Sharon, final dinner. And you're going to learn that essentially the payment will be some portion of this $300,000. That's what the circumstantial evidence will indicate. The payoff is that, which can only be gained if Sharon is killed. But ultimately, you'll learn, when you think about agendas and motives, the end of the evidence will show the defendant has one more trick up his sleeve. He kills Miller. The evidence will show that it gives him a couple of things. The evidence will paint him as a hero, take eyes off of him. The evidence will show that it will give him the entirety of the insurance money, so he doesn't have to share it with anyone. And it also does a third thing. It eliminates all direct witnesses to the conspiracy. As you listen to the evidence in this case, please keep an open mind. But there are things to look out for. As you listen to the evidence, pay close attention to the course of his demeanor through the course of the interviews. They are not the same. Pay close attention about the manner in which the defendant describes and talks about his wife. His body language, his tone, the things that he is doing. And it's not just in his interviews and in the walkthrough. Pay attention to the things he actually says on 911, because you will learn there are inconsistencies in his recollections. Pay close attention. He's not consistent. There are problems at every juncture, and we've only highlighted a few. We've got more. You'll hear those later. But at the end of the day, when you listen to all the witnesses, and you hear the law, it will be very, very clear that it is very, very, very hard to plan the perfect murder. And at the end of the day, the defendant's story doesn't add up. And at the conclusion of this trial, we will ask you to find that man guilty for conspiring with Mr. Miller to kill his wife, and then ultimately finding him guilty for that murder as well as the murder of Michael Miller when he double crosses. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
I could just have one moment just to take all this down.
Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, before we begin with the defense desire to give an open source.
We will, Your Honor, if you have a few minutes.
Okay, what we'll do is we'll take a brief break before we start the reading. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief recess before the defense is open to state. During this recess, you must not discuss or communicate with anyone, including fellow jurors, in any way regarding the case or its merits, either by voice, phone, email, text, internet, or other means of communication or social media. You must not read, watch, listen to news or media accounts or commentary about the case. You must not do any research, such as consulting dictionaries, using the internet, or using reference materials. You must not make any investigation, test the theory of the case, recreate any aspect of the case, or any other way investigate or learn about the case on your own. And you must not form or express any opinion regarding this case or its findings when you. Ladies and gentlemen, I realize that that clock is a lot faster than we think, so it's actually only 10 o'clock. So we'll be back at 10:15.
Please rise for reserves.
That is very interesting. Interesting strategy that the defense is taking here. Let me take them out while they're on the break. Good morning, everybody. I'm just finishing up this baby blanket. Well, not finishing it up. I still have to do the trim. So, wow, not a peep about any of the other wives. I'm actually a little stunned. Yeah. So I don't know. I think that's why they gave the defense a break. The defense did not know what to expect either. So now they're having to probably rearrange their opening statement so they don't talk about other wives as well. But I didn't know all that other information that came out about another woman. There's another woman. Wow. Who knew? He was working on wife number 7. So how are you guys doing today? I am actually going to grab what time is it? Why does my computer say 12 p.m.? Oh, because it is 12 p.m. Okay, they're out in Vegas, so that's why it's 12 p.m. here. It is 10 o'clock there, so they're coming back at 10:15. So just before they come back, I will go and grab another cup of coffee. So how are you guys doing this morning? I am going to do a recap of this as well, probably later on today, in case you can't stay for the whole thing. But I do want to see how the defense is going to adjust their opening statement to align with what we just heard from the prosecution. Very, very, very interesting. How did he get any women at all? Good question. He's not handsome at all. I don't find him charming in any way. I don't get it. I really don't get it. He wouldn't, if I was scrolling through Match, I'd have kept on going when I got to him. Nope. Hi, Yvonne. Good morning. Yeah, he's no. Much less 7 of them. Where these guys. And his wives have all been pretty, nice, beautiful women. Not drop dead gorgeous, but nice looking women. I don't know. He is creepy, Mama C. Oh God, yeah, he's creepy. Oh my goodness. I thought this baby blanket would go really quickly. It's not, because I had to do so much diamond painting. Because I'm trying to do 2 paintings at once. Oh, you guys, do you want to see the Halloween painting I did? I'll show you. So yesterday I was playing around with the watercolors. What do y'all think? Is it creepy? Creepy. Yeah. Anyway, just playing around with the watercolors. So this is going to be an interesting trial. So before they went with the openings, before I went live this morning, they were arguing about the parameters of certain witnesses' testimony, and the judge reserved ruling until after lunch when those witnesses are actually going to take the stand. And then she said she would announce what the parameters of that testimony would be. You think it's awesome? Nuh-uh, seriously? I used some different techniques in here that I thought were kind of cool. Yeah. So, I'm still working on a Halloween collection. So that's going to be one of them. I'm going to do some pumpkins and I don't know what else. We'll see. But definitely part of the Halloween collection. Well, it's official. You guys like it. Thank you. So the judge had asked the attorneys earlier in the week how long they thought it would take for jury selection, and they said 3 days, and she's like, oh no, it won't take 3 days. It took 3 days. Yeah, they did jury selection Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, so that left openings for today. Yvonne says, I really like watching with friends. I do too, but I will recap it for people who are working, and I understand because I do have a lot of subscribers that work during the day, and I'll recap it. That's one of the reasons I have the show, is so you guys don't have to sit and watch the entire thing. But I like to see these opening statements, especially this one where they're so limited about what they can and can't say because of that Supreme Court ruling. If you guys are new to this case, this is a retrial. He was already tried for this conspiracy and these murders. He was found guilty, and he was sentenced to the death penalty. But it was overturned by I'm trying to think, where's Las Vegas? Nevada. The Nevada Supreme Court overturned it. Yes, saying that the jury should never have learned about wife number 2, who died by suicide. Yeah. So they're kind of trying to steer away from all of the other wives. Interesting. Because I thought perhaps we would still hear from prior people that he tried to groom. Like there's a guy named Tarantino, and there's another guy. One of them, the judge ruled, was too remote in time. It was between 25 and 50 years ago. So she said, no, he couldn't testify. I don't know about Tarantino, but he has a history of grooming people to kill his wives. So this is not new, but it looks like they're going to avoid any of that and try to get a conviction without it. It'll be interesting. All right, time for me to get a cup of coffee before they come back. Grab another cup, guys. All right, second cup of coffee. It's hot, and we're ready to go. All right, I need to plug this phone in before it dies on me. Any plans for this weekend, guys? Don't forget tonight, I'll be live with Mickey Sunshine Creates. It'll be on my channel and her channel. So, whatever channel you want to go to, that's fine. It's for the event. And I hope you guys can show up and talk about if you're not doing the events, show up anyway. Because, Mickey and I like to bicker. I am watching the second channel to see if and when they come back. Right now we have a picture of the ceiling. Looks like it's going to rain out today. I don't mind because I'm tired of this heat. Heat advisory today till 9 p.m. What? Not right now. No heat advisory right now. I'm trying to get you guys up on the iPad. So There we go. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up too button, the button. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. If you snuck in and you didn't say hi, subscribe, get to know us. Look at all those people in blue, my members and my moderators. Nice. You know who I miss? Remember, what was her name? She used to moderate all the time. I haven't seen her in a while. Sometimes she'll pop into my game night. Odd But Nice. Remember Odd But Nice? Yeah. I remember her. That's right. Odd. So she is still around, but she's apparently does Zelda. She plays Zelda. Look at that. I still haven't painted that gnome back here. I haven't finished painting it. But the glitter turned out. You can see the glitter on it. Pretty cool, huh? I got to finish painting it. The watermelon. It's just his glasses and his hair. Hi, Lois. Welcome. We're taking a little break. In about 3 minutes, the jury's going to come back, and we're going to hear the defense opening statement. Now, I will tell you the prosecution's opening statement was a bit of a surprise. I was not expecting that they would leave out all of his past. The problem is he is probably going to take the stand in his own defense because he's got a big mouth. He likes to run his mouth. And he will, because he did in the first trial, he was on the stand for 2.5 hours in his first trial. If he takes the stand and he opens the door, then the prosecution can bring in all of that other evidence. So the question will be, does he take the stand and does he open the door to the evidence of his past wives? But I sure didn't know he had a current girlfriend. That was a little surprise. Oh, usually they don't show the autopsy photos. That took me back a little bit too, because I would have certainly warned you if I knew that was. This is why I don't like PowerPoint presentations. I don't like dog and pony shows. When I was working as a lawyer, my boss always wanted me to do the dog and pony show. He wanted to have the PowerPoint and the this, and I'm like, no. I hated it. And I knew the juries hated it because, yeah. Oh, God. But, yeah. He had those photos up there. There they were. And that guy was shot right in the head. Oh. They don't even usually just show the bodies on the ground like that. I was a little surprised by all of that gruesomeness. So the question is, do I show it on the recap? I won't. Nobody wants to see that. I'll tell them if they want to see it, they have to come watch this. There we go. Because I'm not going to show it on the recap. That's cruel. All right. It is. We got one more minute, but they're always late coming back because everybody's got to go to the bathroom and get another cup of coffee. And he had to make that point clear about the mask. Yeah, that whole thing about the mask and the bullets. No blood in the hallway, no bullets in the hallway, no mask. The mask was nowhere near the body. And there were no bullet holes in the mask. So, but they didn't have to show the body for us to know that. Yeah, clearly he double-crossed the guy and he killed him. So, Yvonne, one of the things I want to watercolor paint, I'm going to watercolor paint Link from Zelda. I'm going to sketch him out and I'm going to try to watercolor paint him. Someone suggested I do like a Barbie gnome. That I might do too. That would probably be fun. But I got to find some like really cool pink watercolor paint for that. All right, I am watching. I don't believe we've gotten anything yet. Let's see. Okay, they are live. Let's go back to the courtroom. There you go. Oh, they're going to be live in just a second. They're bringing in the defendant, who, by the way, has cut his hair for the occasion. We don't get to see him in his scraggly ponytails, which is so ungodly sexy. Yeah, I just want to reach through the screen and grab him. Okay, here we go.
Yes, Your Honor.
Vince, you may start your opening statement whenever you're ready.
The brief moments of laughter and levity that we had during jury selection are over. We're about to see some of those very serious photographs we talked about, and we're going to hear about some really serious things. Because after all, ladies and gentlemen, this is a murder case. And make no mistake, you're going to hear evidence about a murder. And you're going to hear evidence about the murderer who committed that murder. You will hear convincing, overwhelming, uncontroverted evidence about the man who committed that murder, about who he murdered, and why he did it. We're going to learn that on May 8th of 2008, that man, that murderer, entered the home of a married couple, husband and wife. And he did so with the intent to steal their earthly possessions. And when the wife and that husband and wife relationship came home just a little bit too early and surprised him in the act, that man, that murderer, took a .38 caliber revolver loaded with high velocity plus P rounds, and he leveled it directly at her unknowing, unwitting, unaware head. And then he pulled the trigger, and he buried a bullet into that woman's skull. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what you will hear during this trial. But that man, that murderer, is not Thomas Randolph. That man, that murderer, won't be in this courtroom. You will hear evidence about the man, the murderer, that committed that unthinkable, unbelievable, unfathomable act. That man, ladies and gentlemen, is Mike Miller. Centuries ago, the philosopher Marcus Aurelius said these words: "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. And everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." So what is the truth about what really happened on May 8th of 2008? What really happened? And what will the evidence really show? Well, here's what we're going to learn. We're going to learn about Thomas Randolph, or as Mr. Orem and I and most of his friends call him, Tommy. Spells it a little bit different. And Tommy, you'll learn, is a little bit different. But in 2008, he was married to Sharon. They had married in a ceremony abroad. They'd gone to Cancun in 2006 in the month of March, and they got married. And then they had a formal ceremony in Las Vegas a year later in March of 2007. you'll hear a lot from Tommy during this trial. The state showed you a number of interviews that he gives when he's cooperating with law enforcement. You're going to find out that Tommy is kind of brash. In fact, in one of those interviews, he describes himself, among other things, as cocky. And you're going to learn, and you saw a little bit of it in those blurbs that Mr. Hamner picked and chose to show you, that he uses colorful language. Here's what you'll learn. He uses that language with everyone, including Sharon. Tommy is as Tommy is. That's the ABCs of Tommy. And when asked by law enforcement to describe his wife, who he loved deeply, he didn't just say, she's great, I love her, she's my wife. He said, she's fucking wonderful. That's just the way he talks. And it's important to know that because he talks that way the same to law enforcement as he does to his friends and his family and his wife in their own personal relationship. On May 8th of 2008, they were scheduled to have a date night. And despite the way the state would describe this as a very tumultuous relationship, you'll learn they had their ups and downs. But on that night, they had a nice night, at least at the beginning. See, Sharon and Tommy went to the Santa Fe casino. They had spent a lot of time there. In 2005, they opened a movie theater in the Santa Fe, and Tommy and Sharon liked to go to the movies. They also liked to go out to eat. That evening, they went to a steakhouse called the Charcoal Room. It was Mother's Day around that weekend. So Sharon had been taken to the Santa Fe station to that special dinner to have steak and lobster. And they had a good time at dinner. We're going to learn that they originally intended to go to dinner and a movie. They love to go to the movies. In fact, in some of the crime scene photos, you'll see the enormous collection of DVDs. Back before we streamed everything on Netflix and Amazon, people actually had movies in their house, and they had hundreds of them. On that night, as they left dinner, we're going to learn that they decided to change their plans. They wanted to go home early because they had had such a good time. And you'll see video evidence of them leaving the Santa Fe hand in hand, not fighting, not arguing, but having a good time and being affectionate with one another. What they didn't know and what they couldn't know is as they strolled hand in hand through that parking lot, what Mike Miller was doing. So who's Mike Miller? Well, the state told you from their perspective who they want you to think Mike Miller is, but here's what the evidence is going to show. That he had met Tommy Randolph. Law enforcement's actually going to tell you that they had met prior to February, way back in December of 2007, and they met when Tommy extended an act of kindness to Mike Miller. And they became friends. And from the state's perspective, they can describe that as weird, but Tommy befriended someone who was down on his luck. And he didn't just have him do odd jobs, he did those. You'll learn that. The state describes this roof project that never got finished. It did. You'll hear evidence of that. He performed odd jobs not only for Tommy Randolph and Sharon, but for other people in their family as well. And they spent a lot of time together. We're going to learn that they communicated a lot. The state's going to show you that evidence. Remember, this is 2008. Most of us hadn't even heard of an iPhone yet. They'd just been invented the year before, and people weren't text messaging all the time. They talked on the phone, very brief conversations. Tommy was kind to Mike Miller. On May 8th of 2008, Mr. Miller had learned a lot of information about Tommy Randolph. And on May 8th, he used it to his advantage. And he did so to take advantage of Tommy and Sharon, to steal from them. See, here's what Mike Miller knew on May 8th of 2008. The evidence is going to show you this. He knew there were valuables in the Randolph home. They had jewelry. You're going to see a lot of jewelry that belonged to Sharon Randolph. They had cash. We're going to hear evidence, and we're going to learn that on May 8th, Tommy had been to a bank and taken money out. He had a lot of cash, and he intended to deposit it into a different bank on that day. But he didn't make it to the bank before it closed. So he had that cash in the house that day, and it was only going to be there that day. You're going to learn, we're going to see a lot of photographs, that there was prescription medication. Mr. Randolph has a number of physical ailments. You'll see evidence of it. You'll see him in the courtroom as he moves. You'll see him on the video as he moves. He has a lot of physical pain, and he was prescribed a number of medications that to him are necessary for his health, but to Michael Miller are valuable to sell on the street. We'll also learn that there were guns in that house, some that belonged to Tommy and some that belonged to Sharon. But we're going to learn that Michael Miller knew exactly where all of those valuables were kept because he had been invited into that home. And he knew on that evening that Tommy and Sharon would be out of the house. See, he was with Tommy when he was discussing his date night plans. He knew that they were going to go to dinner and a movie. He'd heard all about it. Tommy had dropped him off right before he went home to pick up Sharon. So that was Mike Miller's motive that night, to take what didn't belong to him. And the timing was it had to be that night. Because he knows Tommy's late to pick up Sharon, and he knows they're going to be out for several hours at dinner and a movie. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know he's got a stretch of time to get in the house, get what he wants, and get out. So Mike Miller's dropped off by Tommy. He makes his way back to the Randolph home, knowing they won't be home, and he gets inside. As I mentioned, Tommy and Sharon decide to come home early. They decided to skip the movie. And we're going to learn exactly why that was. See, in everybody's personal life, when they have a significant other, there are times when those people desire to be alone and intimate, and they probably talk in a way that you wouldn't talk in front of other people. We're going to hear evidence that that night, Tommy and Sharon were going home to be alone, to be intimate together. And we're going to hear it described in the unique way that Tommy and Sharon talked. What they didn't know is what would happen when they got there. So they pulled into the driveway. This is a photograph obviously taken after the homicides. There's crime scene tape up, but you can see the cars as they're parked in the garage. Tommy's car on the left and Sharon's SUV on the right. You can see that in that garage, there's not a lot of extra space. So as Tommy desired to pull in, he had to, as many of us probably do, let Sharon out in the driveway. She walked inside. You can see that there wouldn't be room for Sharon to get out on the side if he hadn't done that. So he pulls in the garage, and then he walks inside the house. This is where the events happen that cause us to be in this courtroom, at least in part. What we're going to learn is that when Thomas Randolph opens the door, we're going to learn that it's after a few minutes. One of the things that we'll know at the conclusion of this trial is that Tommy Randolph loved rock and roll music. Saw pictures of him with long hair. Almost always had really long hair. Loved 70s rock music, listened to it all the time. In fact, some of the most memorable dates that Sharon and Tommy had were going to rock concerts. He pulled the car in and he listened to a song finish on the radio. And then he walked inside. As he opened the door, he sees Sharon lying at the end of that hallway. He calls out to her. At first, he thinks she's fallen, and he props the door open. As he walks inside, it dawns on him that she's actually hurt. She's not moving. And he sees something at the far end of the hallway. He's scared. Tommy has a firearm in the house. To the left, there's a bedroom. There's a closet, and he keeps a handgun, a small handgun, with some magazines in there. He calls them clips. And he takes those, and he waits for a second. And as he goes to look out, there's a confrontation in the hallway. Happens very quickly. He runs into someone, and you'll see him describe it on video. You'll see him try to remember exact details of things that would be impossible for anyone to remember in that situation. He describes physically running into each other, and in fact, Tommy's lip is cut, and he reports that to law enforcement later that night. There's some space made, and make no mistake about it, at some point, Tommy Randolph shoots that gun at the intruder who has murdered his wife in a brutal fashion in their own home. He follows him towards the door and he shoots. He doesn't know how many times he shoots. Most people in that situation don't, as we'll learn during this trial. Until the intruder falls just outside the door. At some point, when they collide, the mask that the intruder is wearing is pushed up so that he can't see. And as we'll learn, by the time he gets outside, that mask is off. We're going to know what happens after that because we're going to hear evidence during this trial. Eventually, Mr. Randolph comes back inside and he looks for a telephone. He wants to call 911. Some of the younger folks in this jury panel might not realize this, but there was a time that everyone had a phone in their house. He goes to get his cell phone, his house phone, and he picks it up. At the time, there was a subscriber by the name of Bonner, some of you may remember. That service was kind of the gap between old school landlines and the cell phones we use today. And sometimes that service would go out. Tommy picks up the phone and he dials 911. There's nothing there. He tries again. He begins to look for his wife's cell phone, continuing to dial 911. The third or fourth time he tries, the phone rings. And you're going to hear that phone call during this trial. And you're going to find that as Tommy attempts to perform CPR on his wife, it's a lost cause. That is a brutal injury that Mike Miller inflicted on her. And there's no coming back from it. But he tries. And there on her legs, when law enforcement arrives, is that telephone. And you'll be able to see the 911 that he had dialed and the inadvertent pressing during that process of the number 4. That's what gets law enforcement to the house. What's interesting is the state points out this inconsistency that he said he didn't hear or that he didn't know that there had been shooting in the house when he walked inside because he didn't hear anything, but then on the 911 call he says shots. He does say that. He says, all I hear is shots, 5 of them, which ultimately we will learn are the shots that he shoots. That's all he heard. He didn't hear the one fatal shot that killed his wife. So that's the evidence. Sharon was murdered. Mike Miller murdered her. How about the why? Well, you're not going to have any doubt in your mind at the conclusion of this trial why this murder takes place, because the evidence is overwhelming. Just outside the door, exactly where you would expect him to be if he was shot and killed by Tommy Randolph, exactly as Tommy described, you will see the body of Mike Miller. His feet are just outside that door. Next to his feet are a couple items of evidence. We're going to talk about those in just a second. But one thing we're going to learn is that when someone's killed in a homicide, they're taken to the coroner's office, and there's a thing called an autopsy that's performed, where a medical examiner determines the cause and manner of the person's death. When that's done, their clothing is removed and inventoried, and you'll see what Mike Miller was wearing on May 8th. You'll also see what's in his pockets. In his pockets, you'd see things that you would expect to be in Mike Miller's pockets. Matches, lotion, pocket change. But you'll see something else. In his left front jeans pocket is a ring, a lady's ring. It's called an eternity ring with channel set diamonds. It ain't his, but you'll know exactly where it came from. In his back pocket on the left-hand side is his wallet. In that wallet, you see things that you would expect to see. His ID, his social security card, membership cards with his name on them. But you'll also see something that you wouldn't expect to see. There's an ID in his pocket under the name, same first name, Michael. But it doesn't take a genius to see that's not Mike Miller. You'll also see in his pocket, bearing the same name of Michael Hogue on the driver's license, a Golden State Advantage card. You will learn during this trial that that's an EBT card, a food stamp card, ironically titled Golden State Advantage, in the pocket of the person who was taking advantage of the Randolphs. We'll also learn something very interesting that'll be telling about exactly what transpired in this case. See, as he lays on that garage floor, no longer with us, Mike Miller is still telling us what he was doing there. Because on his body are gloves. In May, in Las Vegas, you do not need to wear gloves unless you're working in the garden. Mike Miller was attempting to take home a bountiful harvest that night, but it wasn't flowers and it wasn't vegetables. He's wearing gloves in that house for a reason. And I want you to pay attention to something else in this photograph. If you look just above the right hand of Mike Miller, you'll see something on his wrist. We're going to learn during this trial what that is. And you'll find out that that's something that's used by emergency medical responders as they're there trying to resuscitate him. That'll be important in this case, as will those gloves, because we'll know at the conclusion of this trial exactly where those gloves came from and exactly why they're on his hand. We're also going to hear about this ski mask that the state brought up in their opening statement. It's going to be crucially important in this case, not for the reasons that Mr. Hammond told you. This ski mask is an unusual one. First of all, there aren't a lot of ski masks in Las Vegas, but this one has something rather unique about it. It has an exceptionally large mouth opening. So when you see it in evidence during this trial, you'll see it's been sewn shut with something that resembles fishing line. That's going to be important because at the conclusion of this trial, we're going to know why Mike Miller had that, and we're going to know exactly what that mask was for. Now let's get back to this evidence I mentioned at his feet. There's two bags. One is like a plastic grocery style bag. The other is also made from plastic, but it almost appears like a black colored fabric. Those are both grocery bags from the biggest retail store in the world, Walmart. Inside and around those grocery bags is the answer to the question of why Mike Miller was there. Because you'll see in those bags and strewn about them after he had fallen to the ground trying to escape, after killing Sharon Randolph, all of Sharon Randolph's jewelry stuffed into those bags and in and around them where they had fallen to the ground as he lay there dying. Inside those bags, law enforcement does a search and they pull out not a little bit, but a lot of it of jewelry. Lots of it. They spread it out and they photographed it. The state would have you believe during this trial that this is what the detectives refer to as cosmetic jewelry. You'll actually learn that some of that jewelry is quite valuable and that Mike Miller knew that. You'll be able to look at those photographs at the conclusion of this trial and you can determine for yourselves what that's made out of, what you think it's worth, what you believe from your perspective about that jewelry. What you can't do, though, is actually look at it because law enforcement never impounded it, they never tested it, they never had it appraised because it didn't fit their perspective of the case. But there will be no doubt in your minds about who had those bags and who placed them there because you're going to hear from a witness that cannot lie, cannot change their story, and doesn't have a motive. You're going to hear from a little witness called science. That on those two bags, there is overwhelming evidence that Mike Miller had those bags. See the bag on the right? That's actually Mike Miller's bag that he brought into the home. And we're going to know that because it's got his DNA in it. But it's also got something else. Before he puts on his gloves, he leaves a fingerprint on that bag. The bag on the left, that's actually Tommy Randolph's bag. But even though it's Tommy's bag, we're going to know who carried out that door because that bag also has Mike Miller's DNA on it. So let's go inside the Randolph home, someplace the state didn't really take you, because it doesn't fit the perspective of this conspiracy theory they have. This home is ransacked. You will see inside the house there are drawers left open. Not all of them, just the ones where valuables are kept. And you'll see strewn about the house where Sharon had kept her jewelry. See that little heart-shaped jewelry holder? You'll see the drawers in the bedrooms open. You'll see a jewelry box tossed into a clothes basket in the closet, and you'll see her jewelry box thrown on the bedroom floor. That's the evidence. That's the evidence that someone who knew exactly where the valuables were kept had gone into that house and got stopped before they could get away. So what happens? Why are we here? I'm going to tell you why. The state mentioned the crime scene a little bit. They kind of looped over some of the important stuff, though. This is the scene. You'll notice a couple things about this picture. Crime scene tape up, like you've probably seen on television. And there's a patrol officer in uniform on the left-hand side of that photograph, responsible for putting up the crime tape and kind of monitoring the border there. Inside the crime scene tape, so inside the crime scene, you see two individuals. The one on the left is a guy by the name of Lou Roberts. He was a homicide lieutenant. He's now retired. The guy in the middle, next to Tommy Randolph's car, is a detective by the name of Dino Kelly. You're going to hear from him during this trial. And you're going to hear from his perspective what this evidence means. Crime scene analysts are ultimately called to that scene. And Mr. Hamner showed you this same diagram. Here's what is on the diagram, and then I'm going to talk to you about. In the top left-hand corner, you're going to see an event number. That's the number that the LVMPD assigns to this particular call. You're going to see the date, the address where it occurred, 6517 Rancho Santa Fe. You're going to see the personnel number. That's the initials and the ID number of the crime scene analyst who prepared this diagram. And you'll see the names of the two deceased, Sharon Randolph and Michael Miller. In the middle of this diagram, well, let me just start here. The purpose of the diagram, you will learn, is to document, collect, and preserve accurately what happens in a crime scene. Why? Because we can't come into court and make representations about it unless we know exactly where things were and how they were found. In this particular case, there were three crime scene analysts that were called. One is a woman by the name of Chelsea Collins. She's a crime scene analyst in the top there at number 1 on the left. I don't know if she'll be called during this trial. The second one is a crime scene analyst, senior crime scene analyst by the name of Jeff Smith. I expect that the state will call him during this trial. The third one is a crime scene analyst supervisor by the name of Gary Reed. The state will not call him during this trial. On this diagram created by Ms. Collins, you will see what we call a legend. It's a numeric listing of everything of importance that's in that scene. It's not just the bodies that Mr. Hamner showed you, but it's also the evidence. We should not have an expectation, ladies and gentlemen, that crime scene analysts will be perfect. But in cases like this, we should have an expectation that crime scene analysts can at least count to 10. If you count the numbered items in that diagram, you will see 1, 2, 3 cartridge cases. That's going to be important. You'll see a receipt from their dinner, a knife on the kitchen table, not 1 but 2 bullets. Remember, the state told you they found 4 in the garage. You'll see the mask and a hat. You'll notice that nowhere on the diagram and not within the legend are the numbers 10, 11, 12, and 13. That's going to be important. You'll see 14 and 15 following that. The reason this is important is because the state is going to tell you during this trial that those shell cases, they're not called casings. The casing is what goes around the outside of a sausage. A case, a shell case, is what's left behind when you shoot a gun. And the state's going to use that critical piece of evidence to have you see the case from their perspective. You'll see there's 1 shell case, 2 shell case, 3rd shell case directly in front of the door. What you'll learn is those shell cases are exactly where you would expect them to be if this shooting happened like Tommy Randolph described. What's really interesting, though, is we're going to find out during this trial that law enforcement makes up their mind that night. They make decisions that very evening about Tommy Randolph, and it's on the evidence that they perceive that night at that crime scene. Remember, there's 4 bullets, but only 3 cases. We will learn that the shell cases are very important. And we will learn the problem with that evidence that the state just described to you. Here's a problem. See, there's a lot of people at that scene. It's not just those 2 detectives and those 3 crime scene animals. At that scene, there are not 1, not 2, not 3, but 10 patrol officers and 3 supervisors, 2 sergeants and a lieutenant. Being able to count to 10, I can tell you that's 13 people. There are canine officers, 3 of them, 3 violent crimes detectives. We will learn that back in 2008, when there was a shooting call where somebody died, violent crimes detectives would respond to the scene before homicide. They would walk the scene. They'd make decisions about it. They'd interview witnesses. They'd document evidence, and then they would brief homicide detectives when they arrived. It wasn't just Dino Kelly. There were 4 homicide detectives: Ken Hardy, Cliff Mogg, Dan Long, Dino Kelly. I expect you will hear from 2 of them during this trial. There was also a sergeant on scene by the name of Rocky Albee. You will not hear from him because, like Gary Reed, may he rest in peace, he is no longer with us, and Lieutenant Lou Roberts, who I mentioned a moment ago. There were the 3 crime scene analysts in and around the crime scene. There were also coroner's investigators. We'll hear evidence about that. Mortuary personnel, and then those first responders, paramedics, who are directly in the middle of that crime scene, attempting to perform life-saving techniques. Right in that crime scene, 3 of them. We're also going to hear evidence about guns. This piece of evidence is going to be absolutely critical for you to understand what happened and how it happened, just like Tommy Randolph described it. When law enforcement shows up, they're going to see folded down in one of the bedrooms, it looks like almost a little drawer. But when you flip it up, you realize it's a clock. But the purpose of that clock isn't just to tell time. It's also a place to keep a firearm. It's a gun safe compartment. And you'll know that because you'll see photographs during trial that says set gun upside down in the tray. When law enforcement arrives, it's actually flipped down. It's open. When they flip it back up to take photos of it, you'll notice it'll be easier to see in the actual photographs, but if you look on that wall directly around the clock, you're going to see a different color of paint. That's going to be important to you because you see, Mike Miller was aware that that room needed to be repainted because he was the handyman for the Randolphs, and he knew what was kept in that clock. That's going to be important for your consideration. Let's talk about guns. It's not just one. There's 3 guns recovered at the scene. One of them is going to be the gun Tommy used to save his own life and to take Mike Miller's. It's kind of an unusual gun. It's called a 9mm Makarov. That's the caliber of the gun, not the make and model. Most of us have probably heard of a 9mm. It's a very common cartridge. That cartridge is a 9x19. This is a different type of caliber. It's a slightly more, well, it's shorter, it's a little thicker, and it shoots a much lower velocity shot than a typical 9mm you may have heard of. This particular magazine holds 8 rounds with 1 in the chamber, meaning the capacity of that gun as fully loaded is 9 rounds. Remember, Tommy Randolph says he didn't know how many rounds he fired. There's going to be 3 left in the gun, 1 up above it that was in the chamber. We're going to know beyond any shadow of a doubt that he fired that gun 5 times. But there's 2 other guns recovered at the scene. They're called revolvers. It's a different kind of gun. Has kind of a wheel in it like you might have seen in the old cowboy movies. Those guns are documented on the crime scene diagram. And this is going to be really important at the conclusion of this trial. 14 and 15 are those 2 revolvers. 14 is discovered in the northeast bedroom office. You'll see it's right next to a trash can on top of some clothes on top of a suitcase. That's going to be really important for you during this trial, and here's why. On the 911 call, you will learn that Tommy Randolph actually goes outside and takes that gun from Mike Miller's person. And as he comes back into the house, he tries to throw it in that trash can because the 911 operator tells him, get the gun, put it someplace safe, lock the door. So he does. When police open that gun, they're going to discover that that's a .22 caliber, very small shell case. It's a rimfire cartridge. When you shoot, there would be a marking on the outside of one of those shell cases. You'll notice that all 6 of them are pristine. That gun has not been fired. That gun is the gun that Mike Miller had with him when Tommy Randolph confronted him. All of the bullets in those shells are still in that gun. Interestingly, however, in the east bedroom, next to the wall, there's another gun. That gun is also a revolver, and it looks very similar, but it's different. It's a .38 caliber revolver. It's called a center fire cartridge. Those little circles in each one of the cartridges is where the primer is kept. When the gun is fired, the hammer comes forward, firing pin punches the primer, and it expels the actual bullet out the end of the gun. This is a much larger round than a .22. These are what are called plus P rounds. They're designed with more pressure to create more velocity. You'll notice at the 11 o'clock position, that gun has been fired. That is the gun that Mike Miller chose to kill Sheriff Randolph with. The gun that came out of the clock on the wall, exactly where Mike Miller knew it was. So law enforcement responds. These detectives will tell you that that very night they developed a gut feeling about Tommy Randolph. The problem with a gut feeling, we'll learn, is it impacts your ability to see things from an open perspective. They have a feeling that night that Tommy's to blame somehow. Law enforcement's already made up their minds and decided Tommy's involved when they do this walkthrough. Now, this is the first screen you'll see when that walkthrough video is played during this trial. I expect the state to play it. It'll last about an hour. That walkthrough is an extremely unusual thing. Here's why. It happens a full week later. The crime scene has changed dramatically. It's been cleaned up. It hasn't been sealed. Number of people in and out of it. The LVMPD have Mr. Randolph come back to the address, and they do a walkthrough with him. And they record it. And then they go over and over and over again, trying to get him to say little minute details that is an impossibility for any human to remember. In fact, we'll learn that law enforcement, when they utilize their weapons in the field, they never do a recorded walkthrough like this. And the reason is because it's impossible to recreate that dynamic, pressure-filled event in real time. But you're not going to have to take my word for that. You're going to hear from a witness during this trial named Jeremy Stafford. He's an expert witness. The defense is going to call him. And he's an expert in the use of force. He's got a very long resume that allows him to be an expert in that field. He was a United States Marine Corps veteran, and in fact, you'll learn that he was awarded the Bronze Star for valor in battle in a situation where he had to utilize his own weapon to save his life and the life of others. What'll be interesting about that is he's going to talk to you about the science behind what happens to the body and mind when you're put in that situation. I'm going to give you great detail and cite scientific studies, but he's also going to be able to tell you that from his own perspective, because he's lived through these events where it is impossible to recall every detail. He also worked for the LAPD, retired from there. He was their firearms subject matter expert for the whole LAPD, and he is the handgun editor for the largest magazine in the world dealing with firearms, Guns and Ammo Magazine, and he's the host of the Best Defense on the Outdoor Network. He is an expert, and he will be critical to your evaluation of the evidence in this case. But Tommy Randolph, on that walkthrough video, attempts to cooperate. He answers all of their questions, and he attempts to recall every detail. And he spends hours at that scene with law enforcement a full week later on the 15th of May. Why is that important? Because you're actually going to hear evidence, believe it or not, during this trial that the LVMPD goes back to that crime scene. After the walkthrough, a full week has passed, 35 people are there that night, many people are in and out the intervening week. A hazmat crew has actually come out and done a cleanup. You'll see the carpet cuts out where the blood had been prior. And they go in there and attempt to recreate a crime scene, having already made up their minds about what happened and attempting to use that as actual evidence. In fact, you'll see and you'll hear from another crime scene analyst by the name of Randy McPhail, who will go through painstakingly and put these little arrows on what he would describe as evidence in this shooting. It's going to be real important because that evidence is swabbed, it's impounded. This happened in 2008. They never tested until 2023. And as you sit here today during this trial, they won't even be able to tell you that's blood, and they certainly can't tell you whose blood that is. But here's what they'll tell you. A week later, after the walkthrough, after detectives and 100 other people have been through that scene, they walk it again. They're in a clean garage without the body of Mike Miller. Rocky Albee, the sergeant who can't testify, goes into that garage and he finds 2 additional shell cases. See, law enforcement in the state will attempt to tell you during this trial from their perspective what all this evidence means. But there's actually going to be evidence that we don't know how it got there, when it got there, or how it has any relation to the shooting whatsoever. That's the problem with the physical evidence in this case. State also talked to you about a timeline. And I tell you that's one of the big problems in Tommy Randolph's case. Law enforcement's decided Tommy's responsible, so they take pieces of evidence or their interpretation of evidence to establish a timeline based on their perspective. And they do it, as Mr. Hamner told you, with one perspective of a video. That Funny's gas station video. They tell you a specific time that car leaves a pump. I want you to pay attention during trial because you're going to see on that video an entirely different perspective. It tells you that their timeline isn't accurate. They're going to give you an estimate of driving time while not including certain facts that you're going to have to know when you make this important consideration. They're going to talk to you about Mark Bartlett. His testimony is going to be critically important in this case, but not for the reasons Mr. Hamner told you. He's going to tell you things that are going to let you know beyond any shadow of a doubt that that timeline he mentioned is wrong. And that 911 call. They're going to talk to you about things on that 911 call and ignore others. A different perspective that's going to let you know beyond any shadow of a doubt that timeline is inaccurate. As Mr. Hamner says, there's a problem. There's a problem with the state's timeline, and it's the actual evidence that you're going to hear during this trial. I'll tell you, there's a problem with the relationship that Tommy had with Mike Miller. There is. They've gotten large parts of that story wrong from gossip from third parties and in ways that we will be able to demonstrate to you are completely inaccurate. And life insurance. They're going to tell you that's the motive for Tommy Randolph to commit this crime. There's a problem. Tommy Randolph did not and could not ever take out a life insurance policy on someone else. You can't do that. The person that's insured has to take out the policy. And you'll see that it was Sharon Randolph who got life insurance, that urinated in a cup, that gave blood samples, that signed contracts, life insurance on her life. There's a problem with that theory from the state. It's the evidence. See, here's the deal, ladies and gentlemen. This case really is about perspective. The state will call witnesses and they will present evidence to show you their perspective, that there is one murderer in this trial and that there are 2 victims. The state would have you believe that Mike Miller is a victim along with Sharon Randolph. The problem with that, ladies and gentlemen, is the actual evidence. And when you look at the case, when you've seen the evidence, when you've heard the evidence, and you look at it from the perspective of that evidence, you will know there is but one murderer. His name's Mike Miller, and there's actually 2 victims. Mike Miller victimized Tommy Randolph. When he entered his home, he took his possessions, and he took his wife from him. Mike Miller murdered Sharon Randolph, and he did it in cold blood. And when you look at the evidence in this case, from the evidence perspective, you will know that Tommy Randolph is not guilty.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that will be the conclusion of the opening statements in this case. State, are you prepared to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor, we call Colleen Byer.
Okay, so that concludes the opening statements. I'm going to go ahead and I will recap the rest of today's testimony in a show tomorrow. I will also recap what you guys just heard because a lot of people didn't get to hear it. Jen says it's so hard when people are convicted, it's overturned because you know there was a reason. Yes, a huge reason. So just to recap, if you didn't, I mean, I'll recap it in a show tomorrow, but the prosecution did not talk about any of his prior wives, none. But to my surprise, there was a girlfriend, like he was working on wife number 7. Good God. Had a life insurance policy out on her already. Well, she had a life insurance policy with him as a beneficiary. In any case, interesting, both really good opening statements. You know, I hate PowerPoint presentations, hate them. I think it distracts the jury. So, but I was very surprised that, you know, I knew that he wasn't allowed. The Supreme Court said that the all that testimony regarding wife number 2 could not come in because he was found not guilty of her murder. So I understand that, but I thought some of the other stuff they would bring in during opening, but I don't know. I guess they're going to wait for the defense to open the door to that, and then they'll bring it in. I don't know. Jen says this is why you Facebook and Instagram stalk your possible mate. Okay. Not me. Mm-mm. No. Well, maybe Facebook. Yes, I am a Facebook stalker. Oh my gosh. All right. So look forward to that. Do you guys have any questions? I think I answered the one question someone had is Nevada is one of the states that does allow juries to ask questions, but it is up to the individual judge as to whether or not that's going to happen. You know, Florida is another state that allows juries to ask questions, but not all the judges like it. It really has to be an agreement between the judge and the parties. I mean, when I tried cases, I loved it when the jury asked questions because they're very insightful. You know, they are. Like, hey, was he ever married before? What happened to his prior wives? All right, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the opening statements. I'm going to watch the testimony. No, he's got 4 dead wives. The one we're here for, Sharon. Wife number 1 is alive. They divorced. Wife number 2 is dead. Suicide. Wife number 3 alive. Wife number 3 died of cancer. Wife number 4 is alive. Number 5 died of a heart problem. She went through heart surgery. She had a valve replacement. Went through heart surgery. And 2 days later, I mean, she's up, she's eating, you know, she's recovering nicely from this successful heart surgery. And Thomas Randolph asked their daughter if she could leave the room and let him have a few minutes alone with her mother. And then he comes out 45 minutes later and says, she's dead. She died. Yeah. So not only did he collect life insurance money from that woman, he also sued the hospital for negligence and got money for that too. That was number 4 or 5. I don't know. So then, yeah, 6. And now we hear about number 7 coming up. Yeah. Anyway, that's going to do it, guys. I will see you tomorrow in Crafting and Crime Daily. I will do a Saturday edition so I can bring you up to speed. I will recap the opening statements for those of you who didn't get to see the whole thing, and I will talk to you about the testimony that's going on now. So have a good day, everybody. Hopefully I'll see you tonight at 6:30 Central Time for our event live. Mickey and I will be simulcasting on both channels. Hopefully I'll see you guys there. Take care, everybody. Bye.